The following is a presentation of Project Independence and WCWP. Project Independence is the Aging in Place initiative of the town of North Hempstead. We provide programs and services designed to assist and support the older town residents who wish to remain in their homes as they age. If we don't currently provide a service, we will try and connect you to that service. Call 311 or 869-6311 to get more information or receive services.
Welcome to Project Independence and You.
Good morning and welcome to Project Independence and You on Community Talk Radio 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. I'm your host, Rebecca Miller, along with our co-host, Otto Lohse. Good morning, Otto. How are you?
Good morning, Rebecca. It's been a while.
It has been a while. We had almost, I think, a 3-week break. So
Right.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Otto Lohse, along with Kristina, who is our wonderful radio show producer, and she's also the Director of Senior Citizen Affairs for Project Independence. So today's show has been long and awaited because everybody has questions about food expiration dates, and I mean, more importantly, nutritional value and all that kind of stuff. So we have Siew, and she is your registered dietitian from a Cornell Cooperative extension at Nassau County, and we have had you all on our show for a lot of different themes, and we're really grateful to have you on this topic because there are so many questions. I mean, in our office alone, Kai, we have every day there's a refrigerator, and everyone brings their lunch. You know, so some people bring leftovers, some people bring stuff they made that morning. You know, you name it. And even this morning, I had a little party at my house where we had heroes. You know, I had over the weekend. So I had one that had deli meat and one that had vegetables. And when I got to work this morning, I saw the sandwiches were still there. So everyone out here wants to know if it's still okay to eat them. Because we'll get to that a little bit later. But so every day there are questions regarding, you know, is it safe to eat food, or what's the proper way to store, when should I throw things away? All of that. So with that all being said, thank you so much for joining us. I'm taking a full hour to go over, you know, I guess food product dating and everything that kind of leads up to it. So what's the most common question you hear about expiration dates?
Oh my goodness. Like as soon as you asked that, like a whole flood of questions came into my mind.
That's okay, because we want to know all the answers.
I think the most common question I get about expiration dates is, are they accurate? Because I feel like we are so accustomed to seeing so many different dates on our food products, whether it's on our nutrition label or on the top of the food product. And then a lot of people also don't completely understand what that could mean for their own food safety aspect. And so if you'd like, I can get a little bit into what some of those dates that you see might mean.
Right. Yeah, because we're like, you know, there are dates on dairy, which I mean, you know, there's a whole, you know, you think like those will spoil the most. And there's dates on all kinds of food, you know, prepackaged food. So go ahead and I guess maybe through the food groups and kind of what those dates mean would be great.
Yeah. So I think the biggest maybe announcement I can make here is that actually food expiration dates aren't an indicator of food safety, but rather food quality. And so
okay.
I think for a lot of us, right, like we might think those dates are meant to tell us like when a food might spoil and when we should use it by, but really manufacturers are only legally obligated to tell you the dates of when the food is best eaten by in terms of their quality and their taste. So that's a kind of like a big shock factor to anyone who I tell that to. The only exception to that fact is infant formula. The dates on infant formula are going to be accurate in terms of when it can be safe to feed your child. That being said, going back to food dates you see on maybe dairy or even canned food products, each date kind of has a slightly different meaning to it. So for instance, if you see a label that's listed as best if used by or
Yeah.
best if before, that's probably the most common one. That date that you see on there is only telling you when that product is going to taste best by, quite literally. So if, let's say, a milk product, right, or a gallon of milk says best if used by July 8th, so today's date, that just means that the milk is going to taste its best in terms of texture, taste, and everything you might associate with a milk product tasting. That is all going to be best on July 8th or beforehand. On that note as well, technically, if you haven't opened any milk products at all, like let's say you kept the milk gallon unopened even today, it is still could be safe to eat even after today's date. I always tell people with food safety, I always try to encourage the sniff test, which is just, if you smell a food and it smells like how it's supposed to, great. But if there's any inkling that you might feel is not quite right, maybe things are a little more sour or even stale, I always encourage people to listen to their instincts and just get rid of the food product if you feel something's off, because it's never worth getting sick over like a food product.
Well, you use the words could be okay.
Yes.
Could be okay to use. That's kind of a gamble then. At that point, if you do the sniff test and it passes that, then it's step one. But I guess it still could be a gamble.
Yes.
It could be. It's not necessarily it's going to be good. It could be.
Yeah, so actually most products, if the seal hasn't been broken, it is good to use after the date that you see on the product. I only use the words could be just because I want to be careful about saying things as definite on this show, just because, there could be somewhere out there could be like a product where for some reason it is not safe to eat after the date that you see on the product. And so that's the only reason why I say could be, because again, we want to still make sure that we're using our own senses to still gauge whether foods are safe or not, along with the information that you see on a best of use by date. So definitely a very good point you brought up there, Otto.
So it's best to use by, not expiration, because there are foods that say expiration date too.
Yes. So definitely with expiration, or the dates that are said EXP. Like I said before, most of these dates are going to actually be more so indicators of food quality. But luckily for us, food quality tends to decline when food safety also tends to decline. And so that's why, even though manufacturers are only obligated to report dates for food quality, it's still really helpful for us to use the sell by or best of use by or expired by dates. And kind of like quickly on a note about sell by dates, it's very similar to best of use by. The only difference is that sell by dates are just dates that the grocery stores or food stores need to sell that product by. So for instance, if a sell by date for, again, milk was sell by 7/8, today's date, that just means that the store has to sell that product by today before they take it off inventory. So yes, unfortunately, yeah, the dates for food safety aren't as maybe code cut and regulated as we would like it to be. But like I said before, because food quality and food safety kind of are associated with one another, the dates are still helpful for us to use as well.
Right. I'm also, in storing food that doesn't really come in its own container. So you have to kind of, and maybe a food that doesn't necessarily, like produce, doesn't really have its own expiration date or use by date. So, I mean, you can definitely, do a sniff test on a lot of that stuff. But I'm always like, people say, don't ever put a tomato in the fridge. Don't ever put the cucumber, leave the peppers out, do this. So how do you know which is the right thing to do? And if once you cut it, how do you store produce? So I'm like very confused about, after cooking it, I can kind of figure out what to do. But like while it's still fresh and I'm not using the whole thing, and what's the best, is there like a key to how to kind of store your produce once you've cut it or used it, or even just got it home from the store?
Yeah, so you actually touched on a lot of great points there, Rebecca. You touched on dates, to pantry storage, to fridge storage, to leftovers and like cooked food storage. So I'm going to start at the beginning with the dates on fresh vegetables and fruits. Okay. So if you guys have been to the grocery store, you might have noticed that fresh produce does not have any dates on them normally, or most of them do not. And that's because, again, fresh produce legally does not have to have like best of use by dates. Only packaged products like canned goods, for example, need to have those dates. So that's something I'd love to point out. Another thing that you talked about was, how do you store, tomatoes to other vegetables to fruits? Like, how do you know like where to go for storage? For food, there's a lot of places that you can store them in. So the first place is like the pantry. Second place is like your fridge. Third place is like your countertop. So like kind of what you leave on the kitchen table that's visible. And the last place is your freezer. So you have a lot of options out there in terms of food storage, and each place offers different temperature and light conditions that are going to be best for certain foods. So I'll start with the pantry first. So the pantry can be any space in your house. It can be in the basement, it can be a kitchen cupboard, just as long as the space meets 3 particular conditions. So a pantry must be cool, cool temperature. The pantry must also be dark. You don't want any sunlight going into the pantry space because, again, sunlight could potentially fluctuate temperatures. So a pantry should definitely be not a window space. The third thing is that you also want to make sure that your pantry is dry. There's no moisture in it at all. So cool, dark, and dry is kind of what we're going for in terms of our pantry space. And for your pantry, you're going to want to store vegetables like onions and hearty root vegetables like sweet potatoes and potatoes. And even certain fruits as well, like melons, for example, especially because it's summer season. I know some of us might be having watermelons in our house. So you can store watermelons in your pantry as well. So if you take it from the supermarket, put it in your pantry, that's good to go. As soon as you cut your watermelon, though, you definitely want to put that in the fridge. But yes, a lot of people may not know that you can put fruits and vegetables in your pantry. And so if you're listening right now and you find that you have onions in your fridge, or you are putting certain vegetables, like I mentioned, in your fridge, you can take them out and put them in your pantry because it'll save you a lot of space in your fridge, which I know is a very coveted space for a lot of people, especially in my household. We're always trying to find like empty spaces in there. So yeah, it's a rare commodity. So on that note, I'm going to actually move on to fridge space now and what you should put in that food storage space. So fridges, for most households, are like the primary food storage space for a lot of your fruits and vegetables. Ideally, you want your fridge to be at least 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So definitely want it to be nice and cold. And the reason why is because we don't want bacteria to grow on your fruits and vegetables. Bacteria ideally grows between like 40 degrees to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So if your fridge is 40 degrees Fahrenheit or below, it's not going to encourage bacterial growth. So that's why, again, if you can regularly check your refrigerator temperatures, that's also encouraged as well. So pretty much any berries and any leafy greens are going to go in your fridge. I would say that a good rule of thumb for storing fruits and veg in your fridge is that you don't want to overclutter your produce together. As best as you can, you want to make sure that each food group, so fruits, vegetables, and even meats, has its own breathing space in the fridge. If possible, even, it would be great for each food group to have its own shelf in the fridge. So you can do fruits on the top shelf, vegetables in the middle, and then definitely meats on the bottom drawers or the bottom shelf. And we want to ideally separate all the food groups to prevent cross-contamination. Just because raw meats and veg, you really want to make sure they're not touching at all. Yes. So were there any questions actually about the fridge space or the pantry space before I move on to?
Yeah, I have a question that relates to potatoes, all right? A lot of people eat potatoes and use potatoes, and we always wind up with our potatoes in the refrigerator. And I look back in my life, and in my youth, I worked in a delicatessen. And in this delicatessen, they had a big barrel of potatoes. And my unfortunate job at some point was to clean up those potatoes when they went bad. And they do go bad when they have the eyes and the stuff that you don't really like to look at or smell, frankly. So because of that experience, I guess I have to question the idea that the potato can go in a cupboard. I mean, it depends, I guess, on how many potatoes you put together. Like if you have a big barrel and they're kind of all laying on top of each other, that's not a good thing. Just to elaborate a little bit about the why of the potato in the refrigerator, which I'd be willing to make a survey and say most people put their potatoes in the refrigerator as opposed to not. I'm doing info right here, Rebecca and Kristina. Where do you put potatoes?
I actually keep my potatoes in the pantry. It's in like a little basket thing, and that's where I keep my potatoes.
Oh, good.
I don't know why. Just been doing that forever.
Rebecca?
Well, I actually, I think I keep them out. I've been doing keto on and off for so long that I don't buy potatoes, but my son buys sweet potatoes, so he keeps them out. But we actually have to take a quick break, so we'll come back to the great potato question in a few seconds. You're listening to Project Independence in You on Community Talk Radio. We will be right back with our guest from Cornell Cooperative.
Take WCWP with you wherever you go with the WCWP app. Listen live 24/7 to all of our streams, all from one app. Plus, call the studios directly from the app and visit our social media. Download the app through the iOS App Store on Apple devices or the Google Play Store on Android by searching WCWP Radio, or visit WCWP.org for links. The WCWP app, available now on iOS and Android devices.
And welcome back to Project Independence in You, Community Talk Radio on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. I am Rebecca Miller, along with Otto Lohse and Kristina Liu, and we're talking to Siew, and we are learning a lot about food, storage, expiration, best use. So before break, we were talking about the best way to kind of store food, whether it's in a pantry or in a fridge, and we're specifically about produce. So I don't know if this is where we want to talk about it or not, but what about I've used an avocado that I usually keep out. I don't fridge. I've got half left, and the same thing with my tomato because I've used my avocado and my tomato together. So what's the best way to store it? Do they go in the fridge? Do we put lemon on it? I mean, you hear so many different kinds of things. And, of course, the avocado question is it turns color so quickly. Is that a determining factor also just based on the color that it's bad?
So for avocados, again, the color discoloration is coming from just oxidation. So being exposed to air. And just because it has that a slight discoloration doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but it is the start of the avocado potentially getting spoiled. Because again, just like us, bacteria on our food need oxygen to grow and thrive. And so a good rule of thumb when you're storing, especially something like leftover avocados, where a certain part of it is exposed, is you want to minimize its exposure to air. And so for storing something like an avocado, I typically, if I know I'm only going to use half of an avocado, I try to make the leftover half be the one with the pit in it. So that way it's at least covering some area. That's like a little micro example, but what you would ideally want to do is maybe take like a cling wrap to then just really stick the wrap onto the avocado. Definitely make sure that there's no air exposure on the avocado. And you can also, even before that, put in like a couple of drops of lemon or lime juice to kind of further discourage oxidation. So just a short answer is that discoloration isn't necessarily bad, but it is the start and a sign that you should probably use that product.
Right. I like that. I mean, that's Kristina. I think that's a nugget for us, keeping the pit in. That makes so much sense. So that's great. What about the tomato? So I like tomatoes on everything, sandwiches, salads. But it's, do you wrap it? Can you refrigerate it? It seems like you're not supposed to ever put it in the fridge, but is that?
So that's a really great question. Tomatoes are a tricky one because ideally when you come home from the grocery store, it's best to actually keep it on the countertop before you even use it. However, when you use tomatoes or if it starts to become a little bit more ripe, maybe a bit more soft, it tends to do better when you move it to the fridge.
Oh, okay.
So there's kind of like a two-parter food storage system with tomatoes. So countertop first and then fridge when it's ripe. But I will say if you're cutting like half a tomato, again, you can do the same method with the avocados where you just use cling wrap. And I definitely want to minimize any exposure to air. Another tip you could do is you could even like roast your tomatoes if you want. So cook it before you refrigerate it to make sure that at least you're still getting the best quality out of that tomato. So roast it before you fridge it would be another strategy.
The tomatoes are, I have 3 tomato plants. All right. For years, I couldn't grow a tomato. All of a sudden, I've got the golden touch. All right. So you get 3 tomato plants, and then they all pop at the same time. And now you wind up with so many tomatoes, you don't know what to do with them all. And we're not in the mode of preserving them or whatever. So what you just said, the words, I think you said clean wrap. If you put clean wrap around the tomato, will that extend its life?
So it does minimize the exposure to air, especially if, like, let's say you cut a tomato in half, there's like half of it exposed. The cling wrap will actually prevent further air exposure, which would kind of increase the shelf life of your tomato. But you actually also gave me another idea that popped up in my head, Otto, which is you can also can your tomatoes if you want it to last a bit longer and you want to prevent food waste in your household. So you can do a quick canning or quick pickling of your tomatoes, just a simple like water vinegar mixture, and that will extend the life of your tomatoes for another couple of days.
Okay, now for one who has never canned anything, all right, how would I can a tomato? What do I do?
So I guess perhaps the better word to say would be like pickling. So you could do like a water vinegar mixture and do like pickled tomatoes. So for instance, you want to do a 1-to-1 ratio with water to vinegar. And then if you want, you could add spices to your mixture as well. So even chili flakes or other flavors like garlic or any herbs you might like, you can throw it into your brine as well. You could do even not just tomatoes, but also other vegetables as well, like other greens, like onions, carrots, radishes even. So the pickling aspect is not only for tomatoes, but also other vegetables.
Let's go back to the real kindergarten stage, which is what I'm at. All right. When you say, do you get a pickles like a preserved jar, like I've seen with the clamp on the top, where you tighten it up? That step one? You need those jars.
Yeah,
All right.
so
Okay.
any type of like a sealable container should work. But it might be easiest if you just buy like those typical resealable can jars.
Mason jars, I think they were called back
Yeah,
then. Yeah.
yeah, they tend to be sold in bulk packages, like up to 6 jars, for a really good price. So I would definitely look into that if that's something you're
And
interested.
where do you keep that after you finish? That goes into the pantry?
That's a great question, actually. So, home pickling, like I mentioned, if you want to do soak your vegetables in a vinegar, water, brine mixture, that's actually going to go in the fridge.
In the
So,
fridge?
any quick pickling at home is going to go in your fridge. And that's because at home, we simply don't have like the resources to ensure the same food safety aspect as like big food manufacturers have. In the canned products that you see on the supermarkets, they undergo rigorous processes of heating, decontaminating the jars, and doing further sealing processes for the cans itself. So it goes through a lot more steps, whereas at home, we're just trying to essentially extend the life of our produce. And so I always recommend for your pickles to go in the fridge, and it'll last about a couple of days in your fridge as well. So it kind of gives you a bonus amount of time to work
So
with.
you can't just like take all these tomatoes and pickle them in 12 jars and have them for the rest of the year. There's a time limit on how long the pickling, if you will last.
Yeah,
Right?
I would say I have known some of my colleagues to actually try their own canning process at home. So they have essentially mimicked what food manufacturers do, which is to buy a mason jar, um, boil it, clean it, and then you put the produce in the canning jar, fill it with brine, and then heat seal the seal on the jar. So you could technically do that at home if you simply just mimic what food manufacturers do. In that case, if you do follow all those steps, then you would be able to store your vegetable pickles on at room temperature.
You know, somehow suspecting me, I think I'm going to wind up giving a lot of tomatoes away and and eating a lot of tomatoes during peak time. I
Yeah.
have one other point that I'd like to bring up. You said earlier that when you buy fresh produce, all right, and you think about it, there were no dates on the fresh produce, all right. So we don't really know how fresh the fresh produce is. You know, it could have come from who knows where and taken however long to get there. Um, any suggestions on like how do you, you know, what I'm not questioning supermarkets, but you know, supermarkets they're in a business and they have to get this produce from somewhere, and it takes
Mhm.
time to get there. Uh, and you know, how do you know when I know you have to probably go through each kind of produce independently, I think it would be difficult to tell what's really fresh. You know, it maybe looked fresh, but then when you get home, it has zero taste. Like to me, blueberries, they look great. They have no taste whatsoever nowadays,
Mhm.
blueberries. It's like chewing on cardboard, to be honest about it. And I remember as a kid, we used to go blueberry picking out on Long Island. And when you came home and you ate those blueberries, your mouth was purple. You know, it had color to it. The blueberries nowadays have no color whatsoever, and and basically very little taste. uh, you know, so I question where those fresh blueberries come from, to be blunt about it, as an example. But you know, I'll stop editorializing here. But just you're thinking about fresh produce.
Yeah, so again, you touched on so many great points there, Otto. Like with regards to the dates on fresh fruits and vegetables, there's not much we can do in terms of really truly knowing which is the freshest at the supermarket. I will say that a lot of supermarkets and retail stores, and even certain food service stores, tend to use the FIFO method. So that's first in, first out, meaning that because, again, there's a limited inventory space as well as a limited time for how long produce and foods last, most businesses will try to put what is more likely to expire first towards the front of the shelf or the front of the area of your produce. So that being said, we can kind of assume or just use that logic and apply it to the fact that if maybe they're using that FIFO method, then we can probably reach for produce in the back, and that could be potentially be fresher. Again, that's something I don't know for certain, but that is something I know the food service industry uses. So
I can tell you what I do, Otto.
Yeah.
I go to the same store and I know when they're getting their produce in. So I know what days it's, not to buy produce and what days are going to be better, like fresher. And I definitely agree with Kai, because it's go toward the back. You got to go in the back, But I actually just wanted to, because we're still in the produce section, and I want to talk a lot about freezer and refreezing, but before we do that, just kind of a little bit about the true difference between organic produce and not, how to take care of your produce once you get it home. I mean, I have friends that use anti-pesticide soap, and they scrub their vegetables. They do so much cleaning. And then I'm a rinser. I'll just rinse the apple and look around, make sure it's okay. So what is the true way, to care for it, and how far do we really need to go? And the difference between organic and non-organic, and do they have a different lifespan too?
Yeah, so from my knowledge, I can't say this for certain, but I haven't heard of any articles mentioning that non-organic versus organic produce will last longer. Again, the major difference between the two is that one product might use pesticides, while the other may have a lower use of pesticides or herbicides or anything like that. In regards to the food washing aspect of produce, if you see any USDA or FDA websites, I again haven't seen any magic formula for washing produce. They always say rinse with cold water as soon as or right before you eat the produce. So that being said, I think as long as you're rinsing your produce under running water, then I think you should be good to go there. In terms of the anti-pesticides, I can't say for certain because I do need to do more research on that front. But,
Right.
Yeah, in terms of, I guess, the recommended typical approaches for eating produce, a good rinsing under the water is still a good method to use.
And then in terms of farm to freezer, and talking about freezer and produce, and some of the things that I heard growing up, these things, maybe they're myths, but if you say you make a lasagna, right, and you put the leftover in the freezer, and then you take it out and you heat it up again, I remember hearing that you can't freeze it again. You can, finish it up, because can't go back in the freezer. So I mean, is that true? If you defrost food to cook, what's the reality of refreezing? Is it not a good idea?
So with refreezing, I think it's best practice to always understand how much of a portion you're trying to eat. Even taking leftovers from a fridge versus freezer, it's still best to understand okay, I'm going to eat this certain amount, and then take out what you need from that product. In terms of refreezing, it's The only factor I could think of is that like when you refreeze something, it just increases the likelihood of freezer burn and the likelihood that ice crystals will form on the food product itself. And what that does for food quality is just completely depreciated.
Right.
But also the fact that it's almost a risk to put foods from the freezer, which is like a good zone away from the temperature danger zone I talked about earlier, the 40 to 140. So if you're taking a food or a leftover from the freezer to like room temperature almost, which is like 40 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, you're almost increasing the risk of putting that food in the temperature danger zone once again. And so, yes.
No, I'm sorry, but an example like that does happen in my house, I can speak for Rebecca.
Yeah, so we had to take a quick break. Otto, we'll come right back to you when we come back to Project Independence in You on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. We will be right back.
WCWP is your home for great music and great conversation. You'll find all that and more on WCWP.org. Listen live on the web, check out the lineup, subscribe to podcasts, and stay up to date on the latest station events. Get in touch with us and let us know if you like what you're hearing. And find out how you can support or get involved at the only community public radio station serving Nassau's North Shore. Plus, sign up to get a free bumper sticker. It's all online at WCWP.org.
Welcome back to Project Independence in You on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. I'm host Rebecca Miller along with Otto Lohse and Kristina Liu, the radio show producer and Department of Services for the Aging Senior Citizen Affairs Director. And we're talking with Siew, and I mean, you're a registered dietitian and so knowledgeable about all stuff related to, it's so important too, food freshness, food quality, food safety. And I know you're saying a lot of things that, you know, people really need to also use, I want to say, their instincts too. So, you know, you're saying you have to do research. We can also do research, but having you on right now and just kind of, you know, answering some of these questions that we all talk about every day, you know, and it's like a big thing in my house too with my sons. I have one that, you know, if it doesn't have a headstone on the top of it, he'll eat it. And then my other will, you know, smell, if something smells nearby, he'll empty the whole fridge. So I know, Otto, before we went to our last break, you were bringing up
a scenario that goes on pretty often. In the morning, you take out pork chops or chicken or chopped meat or whatever, and you put it on the counter because you're going to have it for dinner that night. And I read something in your notes that you shouldn't defrost something for more than 2 hours. That's one piece to it. But the next piece is all of a sudden you leave it out and it's out pretty much for the day. And all of a sudden you decide, because you talk with somebody, you're not going to eat home that night. You're going to go out to eat. All right. So now you have this meat, whatever it may be, that was taken out for the purpose of dinner. And there you are. Now, what do I do in that scenario?
Mm-hmm. So I would say that it's largely dependent on if like you took the meat out of the packaging as you were defrosting it or not. With, let's say I had like pork you mentioned that was still in the package and it was like vacuum sealed, then I would say that you could try attempting to put it back in the freezer and then defrosting it a second time on a later note. But it's definitely something that I do not encourage people to do, or if they do decide to refreeze something, just to be a little wary of that specific product, because it is definitely not a recommended practice. And with regards to refreezing, I would say if the meat instead was exposed, like it was completely out in the open, rather than being in a vacuum sealed package, then I wouldn't recommend that meat to to be completely safe, just because if it's out for more than 2 hours, it does, again, make it prone to bacteria growing on it, especially because we talked about earlier that bacteria, like us, loves oxygen and needs it to grow. And so any chance there is any air exposure, it's a risk for bacterial growth. And so that's
basically you should dispose of it if it's, unless,
yeah.
I guess another option would be to cook it somehow and then put it back in the refrigerator and use it as a leftover. If you can quickly cook cutlets, let's say, in a frying pan, and then you take them and put them back in the refrigerator. Now you bought a little more time, I think. I'm asking, really.
Yeah, I would say it's better to be safe than sorry in most cases. And so I'm gonna like reemphasize that with food or defrosting, you definitely want to not go beyond 2 hours. That's just like what's recommended. But with that said, if you do find yourself somehow cooking the food or whatnot, I would definitely, again, just go back to your senses and use that intuition. If anything feels off, it's always better to be safe than sorry. So I would say if you find yourself in that scenario, again, I would really consider just potentially unfortunately like not using the food, especially if you're someone who is like an older individual. It's just not worth a foodborne illness to get sick from one food item.
I agree with that. I agree with that advice. So I have this freezer question. So there are people that feel you could freeze something forever because it's frozen. So, you have chopped meat in there from, 1978. It's okay because it's frozen. It's never defrosted. Now, I would never even have that in my fridge, but I'm just saying, what is the freezer rule or recommendation for how long you could have something in your freezer frozen?
So the recommendation varies based on what product we're talking about. So for fruits and vegetables, if they're raw fruits and vegetables, they can last up to 1 year in your freezer, given that they're in a good freezer sealable bag. There's like little moisture in it. It's going to do really well and could last up to 1 year for fruits and vegetables. For meat, it's a little bit of a different story. Meat can last anywhere from 3 to 12 months in your freezer. And that's the reason why there's such a large time range, is because how well it does in the freezer is largely dependent on what type of cut it is. So something that's a bit smaller and broken up, like ground meat, let's say, can last up to about 3 months in your freezer. Something a little bit bigger and not as broken up, like a steak, for example, can last up to 12 months. And so maybe for a lot of people that could feel like forever, which is a really great time, because if you think about it, meat only lasts about 3 to 5 days in the fridge, but 12 months in the freezer. So the freezer is definitely a really good option, especially if you're living at home alone. And unfortunately, there's always going to be some sort of leftover meat. So the freezer, I always recommend people to take advantage of.
So you should put a label on it, I would think, because otherwise you have no idea how old it is. If you just look at it, you don't know if it was in there 4 months or 8 months.
Exactly, yes.
So how do you do that? Is there a special label that you can use on a freezer?
Exactly what you said, Otto. Any type of label with the date. So kind of the same way as to how supermarkets keep track of which produce is good to go or not. We can simply write what date we are storing that item in the freezer. And then that will keep track of which items we should use, maybe sooner rather than later. So you don't really need a special label. You can just simply have like a quick like paper label, and then maybe just tape it on whatever package you're packaging the meat on. It really doesn't have to be fancy. Again, food storage is quite simply like the basics. So you don't need any special bags that you see like on the supermarkets that are constantly promoted. You can simply use like a good tight resealable bag or a vacuum seal is the gold standard. But yes, either or would work, and a simple label, like you said, Otto.
If you think about it, there's another approach to this, and that is to buy less so you don't have to put stuff in the freezer. But I'll say buy smart. Sometimes just because it's on sale doesn't mean it's a good buy. Maybe you don't need it and you're not going to eat it for God knows how long. You're probably better off not buying as much, my opinion. That doesn't mean we do that. I'm just giving you what I think would be the right way to go about it. Buy less.
I actually really love that you brought that up, Otto, because we are so privileged to be in or some people are privileged to be in a food environment where you can buy produce and food at a discounted price. And unfortunately, there's a lot of food waste that happens if we buy too much. So it's not only a financial cost, but also an environmental cost when we buy too much food. And so I do want to touch a little bit about food waste, because it is typically in the same conversation with food storage. If we're ideally storing everything in their optimal space, temperature, light, it minimizes our food waste, which is a really great positive environmental impact. But unfortunately, as of last year in 2021, there was about over 900 million tons of food waste as a global community. So that was around the world. And that food waste in particular came from household waste, food service industry, so things like restaurants, and retail sectors, so supermarkets, convenience stores. And actually the biggest contributor to that staggering 900 million ton statistic, the biggest contributor was households. And so it kind of emphasizes the need to essentially shop smarter, not only financially, but for ourselves as well. And it's technically up to us to make sure that we're not only saving ourselves as much money as possible, of course, and being financially responsible, but making sure that we're not discounting the environment for our own needs. And so with food waste, again, we really want to make sure that this is something that's kept on our minds, because it is really a global issue. And at the same time we have food waste, we also still have food insecurity, which is staggering.
Right.
It's just the fact that millions of people around the world are still food insecure, meaning that their eating patterns are disrupted either due to financial difficulties or other maybe accessibility difficulties. So there's a real disconnect between food waste and food insecurity. And that's something that we definitely need to start thinking about as a global community.
Yeah, that's
you go
that's
to restaurants, and the restaurant has a menu a mile long. And then that's one problem to me, at least. They have stuff that there's no way they can store at all. And then the second problem is you go to some restaurants where it's not necessarily quality that they survive on, it's quantity. So they give you so much food that when you look at the plate and you ate for 15 minutes, it looks like you didn't eat anything. To me, that's a waste. Now you can take that home, and now that you get into the leftover management, how do you manage leftovers? We do waste a tremendous amount of food as a society. There's no doubt about it. And people buy, and we're guilty sometimes as well. You buy stuff that you think you're going to use it. Like every week, you get these huge flyers from the supermarket, and everybody looks at these flyers. Not everybody, but some people, and they look and they say, "Oh, the pork chops are on sale. This is on sale." So you buy the stuff that's on sale, and maybe you're never going to eat it, but you bought it because it was on sale. You know, I don't know. I don't know how you get that message out
Well,
there.
you can't remember, you can't shop hungry. Never go to the supermarket hungry. That will cut your, if you do that, then you're in trouble. But you just have to kind of control your own impulsivity. There's always going to be those types of products and ways to get you to buy things. But I just want to stay, just one other question I had about expiration dates and how to know. What about when you go to a deli and you get like cold cuts, whether it's cheese and they're cutting a pound of turkey, a pound of bologna, a pound, and they make their own chicken salad and their own tuna salad or whatever it is. I get the dates and sometimes they're so far off. I'm like, there is no way I would ever consider waiting. Like, I mean, sometimes it's like 2 weeks, and I think it's put in the system wrong. So what's the best way to kind of gauge those types of foods that we get?
So with cold cuts in particular, if you're getting it from the supermarket, definitely looking at the sell by, use by, or best of use by dates are going to be probably your best resource. Again, I know I said earlier it was like all about food quality for those dates, but again, food quality, food safety typically are associated with one another. If you're getting it from a deli store, so like they're cutting it for you,
Right.
they're giving it to you, and it's again, whenever you cut something, it's exposed to air, right? So that makes it vulnerable to bacterial growth. Any type of cold cut from the deli, I would try to eat it within 5 days at least. Just because I treat it as if it's a meat product, because it is, and meats tend to last about 3 to 5 days in the fridge. Even though I know cold cuts are technically cooked, again, it's always better to be safer than sorry. So I always try to say that
Cold
5 days.
cuts, I'm sorry, but they get like a slick thing on them. And when they get that slick part, that's when we know it's time to,
Yeah.
When it starts to look like gefilte fish, Otto, throw it
yeah,
out.
right. There you go. But
Bad,
then
bad.
again, like, what about like turkey versus salami as an example? All right. A salami seems like it would have like all kinds of salt and preservatives in it to make it last longer than turkey. Is that true, or is that just up here?
I would say that with salami, I'm actually not entirely sure if it lasts longer than turkey, if I'm being honest. Um, Again, I would always use like the best of use by dates as a reference for you. So the next time you go grocery shopping, take a look at your salami product and take a look at the turkey. If the salami has preservatives in it, then that's something that would again make it last longer, quite literally. Something like turkey might be less likely to have preservatives just because by the nature of the meat, it's mainly just the meat and salted. So I can definitely see where your thought process is going when the terms of the fact salami might last longer than turkey. I'm not entirely sure if it does, so I don't want to confirm anything, but I would definitely go to the grocery store, compare the 2 dates, and just buy the product that works best for your own lifestyle in terms of how long it lasts.
Kai, we don't have a lot of time left, but I have one quick question. Is there food that people don't realize they can freeze? Is there something like that comes to mind? Because I recently I freeze my own fruit now if I'm not eating it like within a day or two. If bananas are going bad, I'll slice them up and put them in a freezer bag or whatever and put them in there
Really?
for a shake or something.
Yeah,
That's,
so
Yeah.
so
that's
you
a good one.
can freeze herbs with along with like your fruits, vegetables, and your meat. And so if you're having fresh herbs, again, they don't last as long as we would like them to in the fridge. And so what you would ideally want to do is just get rid of any excess moisture that's on your fresh herb. So you can do that by patting it dry with a paper towel. And then what you could do is chop up your fresh herbs, throw it in ice cube trays, and then fill up the ice cube trays with stock or water, whatever you prefer, and then throw that into the freezer. And that's one way you can store your fresh herbs. So then when you want to use your now frozen herbs, what you can do is use those herb stock cubes in soups, in sauces, and really in any aspect of cooking. You can also throw herbs into butter and make a nice compound butter. So you simply just take butter, you can put it in a food processor, throw in whatever herbs you need to use, blend it all together. And then what you want to do is take that butter and then you wrap it, not in plastic wrap, but in like a wax paper wrap. So wax or parchment paper would work. And then you just kind of roll it up like how you would a normal compound butter, like almost like a sausage. You roll it up, make sure it's nice, tight, compact, throw it in the freezer, and you should be good to go.
Kai, thank you so much. You answered so many questions, and it's amazing because we haven't talked to you about the air fryer. I just want you to know that's a huge topic on this show. So we're definitely going to have you back. And it was a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for taking so much of your time and, giving us, answering our questions and just giving us a lot of great tidbits on, food stories and expiration dates and all that. I'm sure we'll have you back. You're listening to Project Independence and You on Community Talk Radio 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. We will be right back with Talk of the Town with Kristina Liu.